to talk about Foreman kind of pre-DevOps days. For those of you who aren't familiar with Foreman, there's going to be kind of a few different phases. Let's see how this door goes. But I'm going to talk about a few different things. First, for those of you who don't know what Foreman is, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Foreman is, kind of the broad architectural goals, what it does, and then kind of what's new, because this is the Foreman 1.1 presentation, so I'm going to talk about what's changed and kind of what's upcoming. And demo time is kind of the fourth thing, but I'm going to intersperse demos instead because I think it's kind of too much to show all at once, and this will make it digestible. There will be questions at the end, but if you have any pressing questions or kind of things that are immediate to what's happening or what I'm explaining, interrupt as you please. I have no problem with that. So Foreman kind of breaks down the process of kind of change, configuration management, and provisioning into three distinct steps. The first is kind of installation. So this includes stuff like, hey, I need to provision a new instance on top of an OpenStack cluster. Let's do that. And then there's the initial configuration. So that's, I have an instance on an OpenStack cluster. I need to set up Puppet, sign the certs. And then there's kind of the, okay, we have this machine, it's running, it's working for us, but we need to update it, and we need to maintain it, and we need to see what's happening. And, like, for example, what happened during the last Puppet run? We need to know that kind of information. And this kind of makes it really easy, and it's a pretty simple but powerful tool. So first, the kind of installation portion is pretty involved, and it really depends on what kind of installations you're doing. So we support bare metal and private and public cloud. So AWS, working on joint support, Rackspace, Cloud V2, OpenStack, Overt, libvirt, and then also just straight up bare metal provisioning via Pixie and TFTP, and kind of kickstart and pre-seed and all of those different variations. And the way that a lot of this stuff gets done is through this tool called the Smart Proxy, and this is basically, it's just a Sinatra-based app. I'll talk a little bit about it, but just a brief overview. It's a Sinatra-based app that exposes different pieces of infrastructure over a REST interface. So things like signing certificates, getting Puppet environments, getting different classes that exist in different environments, DHCP, DNS, all that stuff is handled through the proxy. And it's a separate service that you install. It's really, really simple. It's like 1,000 lines of Ruby, and it does all of the kind of involved management that's not directly related to kind of provisioning, but it things that you need to touch in order to do provisioning. And then there's the initial configuration. So the installation and initial configuration are almost one, because you have stuff like, hey, I need a new IP address, talk to my DHCP server, and find an available address, and give it to this new instance that I'm provisioning. Then we have these things called configuration templates, and these are essentially templates around pre-seed or finished scripts, which are basically just anything that gets run on a new machine when it gets created. And so these are kind of how you start making an instance yours, and also certificate signing. So when the Puppet agent runs, hopefully most people know this, but when the Puppet agent runs, we need to sign the certificate on the master, and via the Smart Proxy, we can actually do that through Foreman. So Foreman, when it's provisioning, it has this kind of orchestration stack, which is basically the different things we need to do to get to a certain state, and the different things we need to do to roll back. So say, allocating a new address in DHCP fails, we need to roll back. So it's kind of this stack where you're working on things, and then you need to be able to go backwards. And then there's this kind of auditing and reporting layer, which involves parsing Puppet reports, an auditing interface for Foreman actions. So say you move a host into a new host group, you can view that through the audit tab. And then drift management. So this is stuff like, hey, what happened? Did this machine change during the last Puppet run? Is this machine healthy, or is it out of date and the agent hasn't run in X number of minutes or hours or days? So the basics. I just went through some of them, but here we go. So this is kind of an architectural overview, and it's this is pretty involved, so we're going to break it down. But essentially, the primary things here are the smart proxy, right? So you run a smart proxy wherever you need one. So say you have a DHCP server, and all it does is DHCP. You install a smart proxy there. You have a Puppet Master. You install a smart proxy there, and you add them individually. So say you have a DNS server and a TFTP server. You can see that there. And those are separate from, where your CA is and where DHCP is. Or you have one in, which I'll talk about a little later, which is a new thing in 1.1, or you have a lot of locations and organizations, and say you deploy a Puppet Master and a CA into every single data center that you have. So if you have 5 around the world for DR or whatever, you kind of just stick a smart proxy wherever you have infrastructure that needs to be managed through Foreman. And this basically just loosely couples every host into Foreman. And there is an API and a CLI. We do LDAP authentication, which you can see here, and then kind of reporting, fact collection, and external node classification from different hosts that are running on compute resources. So like Rev or Overt, which is the upstream of Rev, EC2, VMware, OpenStack. Lots of different options there. And of course, Puppet is an important part of this. This is kind of how we do a lot of the information gathering, and it's kind of the cornerstone of the provisioning cycle. So I talked about this a little bit. The smart proxies are just a Sinatra application that you deploy wherever you need it. It's really, really simple. It has a config file where you just say which features are enabled. So a feature is like, hey, I only need TFTP and Puppet CA here. Disable everything else. I can show you that. And then stuff, TFTP, IPMI and BMC are pretty new, so you can do kind of power management on physical hosts, which is pretty nice. But that's not exposed to the web UI yet, but work in progress. So does everyone, or is everyone kind of remotely familiar with what an ENC is? Yes? Okay, lots of nods. Awesome. So for those of you who don't know, it's external node classifier, and essentially what this does is it just spits back a bunch of YAML, and that YAML says what this host should be. So it contains parameters, stuff like, what Foreman host group is this in, which environment is this a part of, what classes are to be included. So say you need to set up a web server, you need to include your users module that sets up sudo and all that stuff for all your important people. Sets up Nginx maybe and PHP FPM, let's say. And those are all those are just put into the web server host group, and then a host is put into that host group, which I'll show. And correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, we're the only ENC that supports parameterized classes. So if you're using those, this is a really useful feature, which I'll also show off a little bit. And another kind of Puppet integration point is at the reporting level. So it's pretty simple to set up, but basically all you need to do is put a 20-line Ruby script into a certain directory on your Puppet master, and put this into the master section in your Puppet config, and it will send reports to the log, obviously, and to Foreman. And this is basically just an HTTP call that sends reports from every host. And you also need to set report to true on each of your agents, but easy enough. So one of the benefits we get with the ENC is we actually get all the facts from all of your hosts. So we can say, which I'll show, this is a new thing, but we can do stuff like trending. So you can say, hey, you had a bunch of RHEL 5 boxes, and over time you've started to have more and more RHEL 6 boxes, or you have a bunch of Debian boxes and you're transitioning to something new, let's say. So that's kind of a nice thing. And graphs. Graphs are cool too. And as I said, you can kind of manage sets of hosts by fact value. So you can say, every host that's running Java 6, give me that host because I'm about to change it in some way. So this is really interesting when you get into the parallel execution stuff. So you say, every Java 6 host, we're about to go to Java 7, let's do it. And then you use mcollective or another tool to kind of find all those hosts, root them out, and then execute something across them. So this is kind of a nice place where we can do integration with different tools because we can actually find different groups of hosts via the API and then take action on them. Cool. So the first demo. So this is kind of what Foreman looks like. This is the host listing page. And it's obviously it's a pretty simple UI. And you can see here I just have 22 hosts on this Foreman installation. But a lot of the most interesting things actually happen under this new host button. So you can see here we're actually going to start creating a new machine. So let's just say I want to deploy something onto a libvirt host that I have. This is in a lab in Tel Aviv, but doesn't really matter where it is.
Can I see the deploy list? Can you show the deploy list again?
What's that?
Deploy on this thing?
Yeah, so these are all. I'll show this as well. There's kind of some ordering issues when demoing, but this is showing off all of the different compute resources that you have. So these are basically anything that you can provision onto. So say you have an EC2 account, but you also have some physical hardware, and you might run your own OpenStack cluster, and you're moving there off EC2. So you would have each of those on here.
Can you make the font a little bigger, please?
Yeah.
Did you say Foreman set up for Rackspace Gen 2 or no?
Yeah.
Okay, because I didn't see it. Thanks.
We just don't have it on this one.
Okay.
So you have to add them. Yeah. So let's just say we want to call this like Puppet NYC. And organization and location, these are new things in Foreman 1.1, but here you can see this is part of the Foreman organization. So let's say you have a bunch of different business units, and they're all they do their own thing, they deploy their own stuff. Maybe one uses Java, and one uses Python, and one uses Ruby. These are a nice way to kind of split them up and give people who only need access to certain stuff. So if your finance BU person has a junior sysadmin who needs to manage some subset of hosts but doesn't need to provision new stuff, you can do all of that stuff through the role-based control. And then host groups, which I've kind of talked a little about, but I haven't touched on them very heavily. These are basically just collections of parameters and domains and subnets and things like that. That basically it just says this host does this thing, right? So this is a web server. So I'm just going to put it into base for now because this is kind of the most simple one. And then I'm going to deploy it onto the production environment. So these map to Puppet environments if you use them at all. And then say which CA and which master are going to get used. And if we go back up, you can see since this is part of the base host group, we install these things as part of base. So these automatically get included and then they kind of come down the tree from the base host group, right? So for some reason, we're deploying passenger everywhere, but why not? And then you can see over here, this the DHCP smart proxy said, oh, there's this address is available on this /26. We're going to give it to this instance. And then let's just say I want CentOS 6.3 or whatever, doesn't matter, with ext4 file system. And then here's where you see the provisioning templates come in, which are, so this is the Pixie script that it's going to use, the finish template, which runs after kind of all of these other things, the provisioning template, and then a script template. So it does stuff like, this is the kickstart that we're going to use, this is the grubby config that we're going to use.
So can this do sort of arbitrary things on the newly provisioned node?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you could say, if you have your own kind of like, you have some dashboard that lights up when a new host comes online, you could have it like wget some URL so that you would know like...
Well, like I have a bootstrap script that runs outside of Puppet, and so I could run that for example.
Yeah. And it's actually, you can also get parameters about the new machine. So it's basically like, it's ERB that you do through a web editor. And basically, so you could say, give me this host's Puppet master to set up Etsy puppet.conf, or give me this host's MAC address because I'm going to do something with it.
So and it's bypassing factor, or are these deployed out as custom facts, or are you bypassing factor?
Is what would be deployed as a custom factor.
Where's it?
So
I don't know.
These aren't. So
hearing about ERB snippets.
Yeah. So these are basically, these are kind of separate from factor. Yeah, so this is like a little bit separate from Factor. This is kind of before Puppet would really touch the box too heavily, other than, hey, I'm just setting up the agent.
Okay. I mean, one of the things the template might do is install Puppet, for example.
Yeah, so that's probably one of the things that you need to do, right? Because if you want to get the reporting and fact collection, you need to install Puppet.
So everything in this little wizard can be done through the Foreman API, right?
Yep. So essentially everything is exposed through the API, and we're working on the second version of the API now. So,
in a lot of ways, this is replacing Kottler. This level, this half.
Yeah. So this is a question that, like, if you deploy RHEL, everyone asks, "Is this the new Cobbler?" Yes.
It's also kind of like Razor in a sense, except it does more than the bare metal deployment.
Yep. So I'll actually talk about something like that at the end. But basically, we're working on a microkernel just like Razor has,
Nice.
and to be able to install an ISO, have it register into Foreman, and then power up that compute resource and install whatever OS you want.
Right. It almost makes Razor pointless.
I don't want to say that, but
It sounds like it does.
and then there's stuff like ownership. So you could say, this is my, this host belongs to me. Install this will, for example, in our users module, it will set up my pub key as or in the root account, so that if I need to go in and do something and I lock myself out of my own account, I'm the owner. I control this host, and then let's just do it. So hopefully this will work. The VPN connection's really slow, so it might time out. This is across an ocean, so...
And a continent.
Yeah.
Ocean and Europe.
So then, let's see if this is going to cooperate.
We're going to wait 2 hours?
Shouldn't be too slow.
Well, it's an 8-hour time difference, right?
Alright, so you can see here, this actually... So there's some issue with a template on this host, but you can see this is actually like a real-time console over no VNC.
Oh yeah, so it's not it's not Java or anything, or it is Java.
Definitely not Java.
I'm just so used to Java terminals.
So all that, and it couldn't read the floppy disk.
Yeah. So we have a running host on a libvirt compute resource, and you can see here. I'll show you like a fully provisioned host, but we would have all the facts for this host here. Let's actually go to a real host. So let's look at this one. So you can see we have stuff like, this is the runtime, this is how long the Puppet agent run took. This is its MAC address, this is the Puppet environment, it's a Fedora 17 machine, stuff like that. And then here are all the facts.
God, you haven't switched to 18? It's so long.
I know, since yesterday. So you can get all these facts off of it. And you can also go and look at the global value of every fact, right? So you could say, give me all the hosts where the Ruby version is 193, right? Stuff like that. Or give me all the hosts where we have, a path of whatever. You get it, hopefully. Cool. So you can...
How do I do network setup?
What's that?
How do I do... Can I tell my DHCP servers that I want 4 networks and associate NICs on the boxes with networks?
Yeah, so let me actually show you that. So if that box had been provisioned, it would have gotten a lease and it would have worked properly. But I can show you. So we have multi-NIC support now, which is nice. But yeah, it will actually set up the DHCP lease and allocate it to the address and all that stuff. So that's all done through the proxy as well.
Multi NIC, but also multi-network?
So, not easily, but yes. So, actually, let's look at the YAML. So this is what comes from... Sorry, it's kind of weird, but this is what comes... This is the exact ENC output. So when the agent runs and it talks to the master and says, give me the catalog for this box, this URL gets hit with the name as a parameter, and then it returns all the different Puppet parameters and all the classes that should be included. For parameterized classes, you actually will see the parameters kind of cascade down under the classes. So, and then each of these are just accessible as basically you access them as facts inside of your manifests. Cool. And you can also do stuff like initialize a Puppet run from inside the UI, which is pretty nice. We can like look at an evaluated template here, so you can see this is the Pixie template. Sorry, it's cut off, but if you've ever looked at a Pixie template, it looks like a Pixie template, and basically the host will install from it on boot, and then call this kickstart URL. Cool. Any questions? That was kind of a lot.
How does the run Puppet get triggered, actually?
It actually uses Puppet Run, which is deprecated in Puppet 3. We thought it was going to get removed, but it didn't end up getting removed. So now it's just deprecated. But we're looking at doing mcollective integration, which I think is the kind of ultimately right way to do this. The other alternative is just use Puppet Kick, but I would prefer mcollective because then we're kind of exposing Foreman in a more complete way to what mcollective has to offer. So get stuff like real-time management. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. So as I said, like that I just provisioned onto a libvirt host, but you can I've talked about a lot of this, but you can deploy machines onto public and private clouds as well as physical infrastructure and set up all the different things that you kind of would want to get a machine online. And all or nearly all of the integration with the compute resources is done through Fog. So a lot of upstream work has been done with Fog to get libvirt and overt support directly into Fog. So that's a nice thing, as well as better VMware support. Yeah.
So I could totally replace my existing ENC with Foreman, or is it? I mean,
yes, theoretically. I don't know what your existing ENC does, right? Because they're like custom scripts,
right, yeah.
essentially. But yes,
but
it is an ENC.
It's meant to manage the whole life cycle of that. Right?
Yeah.
Can you get Foreman to act responsibly, watching for factor changes and applying classes to node based on changes to factor?
No, not right now, but I think that is a cool idea, right? Like, if a host has Ruby 193, you don't need to deploy some special class that installs 193, because that's what your production application requires, right? So that would definitely be a cool thing. I think the better way to handle that right now is to actually put that logic into your modules. But, yeah.
I think that's where the difference with Puppet users and Chef users comes. Like, with Chef users, they're just using, like, stock recipes, and they're not actually, like, modifying their recipes as much. With Puppet users, they tend to, like, add hacks like that into their modules a lot more.
Yeah.
So
I think it depends, but, yeah. And there's a lot more fragmentation in the Puppet community. There's no, like, this is the Puppet Labs cook, although increasingly there is, but isn't the, like, this is the Puppet Labs cookbook to install whatever.
MySQL.
Yeah. But, I mean, so there are for very common things, and that's great, but Ops Code has kind of always had that, so I think they have a lot more standardization than the Puppet community does, which is an interesting thing to happen, but, yeah. Alright, so new stuff, which is always nice, because shiny things are cool.
I thought bow ties were cool.
Shiny bow ties are the best, man. But I kind of show this off, but I'll show it more in depth right now. So we now have parameterized class support via the ENC. And one of the important things when you're doing this is to make sure from the smart proxy, you can import classes. So we needed to be able to import class signatures as well, right? We needed to be able to say, this class takes these parameters. And so this is something that got added to the proxy in 1.1, and also to be able to output values via the ENC. So I think a lot of people, when I asked if they knew what parameterized classes are, nodded or said yes or whatever they did. But
You never asked. Actually.
the
It was the NC.
I did ask them.
The NC.
Who knows what a parameterized class is? Cool. So if you don't know what it is, it's basically... What's that? What'd you say?
I said you're going to have to learn in Puppet 3. You need
Yeah. So it's basically this, right? This kind of looks like a resource, but it's not. So it's a class that actually takes... it takes parameters. So when you call this class, you can say... these are the packages that I need to install. So this is like a web server class. So let's look at that. So you could say via if you're not using an ENC right now, you can kind of just you would put like in your node definition, you would put a snippet like this where you would say this is my web server class and I use Apache 2 as my web server, or I use Nginx as my web server, and then I put all my vhosts into etc Apache 2 sites enabled. So an important part of this is it kind of gives you more flexibility in actually what you're doing inside of classes. So instead of having to deal with like parameters inside of classes that are kind of hacky, you can actually call the parameters as part of defining a class for a node. So
Can you define arbitrary parameters?
what's that?
Can you define arbitrary parameters in the class, or are these parameters predefined?
So they are predefined. So you can see here, this web server class takes the vhost directory parameter and the packages parameter.
Okay.
So we don't right now because I don't think there's any immediate need to, but maybe there is. I'm interested in a use case if there is, but we don't find arbitrary parameters. So if you set a parameter inside of like a params class, which is a pretty common pattern, we don't have a way to say like these are all the parameters that get referenced inside of this class unless they're part of the signature. So that's what you see the class definition. So this is we maintain a set of modules to install Foreman via Puppet, and so this is one of them, and they're almost all parameterized at this point. Let's see how slow this is going to be. But basically, we have a tool that allows you to give parameters to classes from the ENC. So this is, I'm editing a class Foreman. I'll show kind of how you import classes off of smart proxies, but for now, this is a class that we know about. The proxy has learned about it because it's installed on the Puppet master, and it knows where all the modules live. And basically what this allows you to do is edit individual parameters, right? So let's say the app root parameter is something that really matters to us. And these are sucking in the default, so you can see the default is this. So this is the params class pattern that I was talking about. If you have, you grab a variable out of this params class and use it, yeah.
Is there any Hira integration at all?
Not right now. So there's a community member who's done some stuff around that, and I definitely think that would be great because it's now in Puppet 3. But there's no direct integration, so these are Foreman's own parameters. But it would definitely be cool to be able to do stuff like inside of the hierarchy in Hira, basically just be able to say hey, based on the host group, let's act on that. So there's a lot of stuff that that's relatively easy to implement, and that's a really great thing for the community to do because it means that we don't have to maintain it, which is nice because we're a pretty small team. So if I want to actually change this value, so say the app root on this host wasn't var dub HTML. Let's say the app root on this host was /serve/web, right? I can override that here. I'm not actually going to do it, but I could say serve web, and these are also types. So you can say I'm about to give you YAML, or I'm about to give you a hash or JSON or whatever, and then those will get output via DNC.
Were is that being stored? It's just backed by some database?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Foreman is just a Rails application.
Okay.
Easy enough. So yeah, this is all on top of Rails.
MS SQL Server?
Support for it?
Yes.
I've never tried. Maybe. I don't even know how I would try it.
Pure generic active record?
Yeah. So it's
And it should work.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes we run across like weird queries that aren't exactly perfect for every database, but yes, it should work. But yeah, so the three like mainly supported ones, although I'd love to hear if it works with SQL Server, are Postgres, SQLite, and MySQL.
No MongoDB, huh?
No.
Sometimes a relational pattern is nice.
So for the data types, would you have to convert that back into like a Puppet data type in the module itself, like parse the JSON or something like that? Or like
Yeah, so there are a lot of methods now that will actually like let you do, or functions, I guess they're called inside of a manifest, that will let you actually do like take a parameter as JSON and transform it into an array, stuff like that.
So you'd have to use like the Puppet standard lib to convert that like blob back to deserialize it back into the Puppet DSL data type.
So yeah, these are all kind of interesting things to be able to use inside of classes and helpful in that way. So each of these are, unique. You can also say, I want to override it in this environment. So on production, my app root is something, and on staging, my app root is another thing. I don't know why, but just as an example. Any questions there with parameterized class support?
You mentioned that there was a CLI before, so you could
Yeah.
use it for a set of machines. More possible.
Sorry, what's the
Provision.
Could you provision like 10 machines at once? Not easily right now. You could write something on top of the API that just provision 10 new boxes and set them up. It's definitely something that has been talked about, like build a tool for actually doing mass deployment. So, yeah, Brian.
Well, the CLI,
Brian wrote the original CLI. So.
I mean, the current shipping CLI is just a read-only. You can do searches, pull data out of your Foreman infrastructure, so you can do external automation with host lists and queries and things like that. As they're implementing the 2.0 API, we're going to get a second major generation CLI for free that should implement every API feature.
Yep.
So that's a little ways out, and we're going to get it for free as part of the 2.0.
Yeah. So it exists in some form today. It's kind of usable. But the read-only one's really useful for like if you're using some parallel shell or something like that to actually get groups of hosts back. So
When you say you're going to override some value in the class, are you just saying for just this node that I'm provisioning, or are you saying for that whole environment or something like that?
So it depends what you're editing, right? So
Okay.
here I'm editing the Puppet class, so this would change it globally.
Right.
You could also edit it at the host group level, stuff like that. Yeah. So it depends where in the tree. This is overriding the defaults that are actually defined in the class signature.
Right.
So you could over here have like vhost dir equals /etc apache 2 sites enabled, and then you would override it in the Foreman UI if you wanted to change it. Cool. Yeah.
With all of these changes that can go on in so many different levels and tiers, etc. With regards to change management, do you have any thoughts on how you keep track of all these changes?
Yeah, so can we actually hold that one till the end? Because I'll show you the auditing interface at the end. Cool. So another new thing in 1.1 is organization and location support. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but basically you can now say I either want organizations enabled or locations or both. And so it's really flexible. If you only need locations, only enable locations. If you only need organizations, only enable those. And so this isn't actually released yet, but there are a couple big deployments that are already running it, so we're kind of learning use cases as we go, because it's one of those features that touches every single part of nearly every Foreman deployment. So we're kind of learning about the way people want to use this feature. And they're disabled by default, but really easy to enable.
And How are they going to jive with sub-collectives?
Sub-collectives and
Collective?
haven't really
Okay.
thought. So we don't have direct M collective integration right now, so we're building Foreman, and then the tool will have to kind of yeah. So there isn't like a lot of stuff like external integration work is kind of ongoing, and there's a lot of stuff that we want to build. But the most important thing at first is, I think, kind of making sure that the core feature set is really solid, and then we can kind of go out and say, hey, we're going to do M collective integration. Hey, we're working on bare metal provisioning stuff via like an image, but stuff like that. That's kind of we're branching out further.
Cool. I just see a lot of like almost infinite flexibility, which means infinite ways to define the same thing in multiple places. But, okay.
Maybe we'll see.
Okay.
I haven't played with M collective to the point of coming across that, so I don't know. All right, so back over here. So there's this menu that you can't see, which I guess I can't see either. I'll zoom back in once I go over here, but you can see over here we have locations and organizations, and they're relatively similar in the edit page, so I'm just going to show how each works. So basically what you do with locations and organizations is you put resources into them, and then that kind of changes scope. Yeah. Okay. And so then I can say I'm inside of this location, or if you're a user that has kind of limited access, you only get certain locations that you need to manage. So this works again if you have someone who's in a data center and is racking stuff for you and doesn't really need to provision new hosts, just only needs to make sure, like, hey, that's the right MAC address via fax and stuff like that. You can give them access to say, like, you only need to manage the Westford data center. That's it. And you're only working as part of the finance BU. And then you can say these users are part of it. Which smart proxies are available here, you get it. So each of these, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you can basically say, like, this subnet is available, this compute resource is available, you can only use these media, etc., etc.
So locations have no real base relationship to things like subnet and things like that necessarily. You don't need to be using locations in order to have two data centers if you're just a small company, and you don't need to have that kind of role-based process.
Exactly. So there's a bigger conversation, which Brian can attest to, going on around this, but there's a lot of stuff that's in locations, in things that are more broad than locations. So like an organization where, like, you can put a subnet into an organization. Maybe that makes sense, but subnets are very location-based, right? You don't share a /26 across two data centers. You don't really right now.
Right.
Maybe
I just meant that you don't have to use something might be put into an organization, because I could actually see a business unit or a different organization actually, like, one part of campus, even in the same data center, only being allowed to use this /26, while the other one in the same location, physical location, might still have the other. But location and organization are both role-based access level containers. And,
increasingly so, yeah.
And have some other things they incorporate.
And one of the ways that you can do the, I want to have an organization that's part of a location, is you can actually put orgs into locations. So you can say, this organization is part of these two locations, and that's it. And
can you go the other way around?
Yeah, and this organization is part of these two locations. So if you have, like, finance business unit again, and they have a primary site and a DR site, and then you have 5 locations worldwide, you can kind of set up your organization so that it makes sense like that.
By the by, for DR, you may very well be in a situation where you have a subnet and two data centers that have separate DHCP servers on the same subnet.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So there's, like, this is flexible enough that you can actually do that kind of stuff.
I've actually seen a primary data center and DR site that shared the IP space.
Yep. It happens. It's just not that common.
It helps when it's only 7 kilometers.
Sure. And then stuff like
2 gig pipes.
Yeah. So this location only has your production deployment or something. Yeah, and then put host groups into them. And then, as I said, you can put organizations into locations and locations into organizations.
can you add fields if you have to? Things like a serial number, for example. I wasn't sure if we saw that in the hosts or things.
Yeah, so you can add arbitrary parameters.
Not parameters as much.
Or just like notes.
Notes, facts, things.
Yeah, there's a field in the host as well.
Just things that someone needs to track. Basically, use this as the CMDB.
Yep.
Or the source of truth.
Yep. Yeah, you can definitely do that inside of it.
And that's to maintain backward compatibility with Red Hat satellite installations. Or to
no.
allow them to migrate forward. Okay.
No, not really.
Okay. Okay.
If you want to talk about like Red Hat specific stuff, I'm happy to afterwards. But
I don't really want
it gets very very specific.
Yeah, I just feel like there's some redundancy in here, or some stuff that could have just been handled by simple tagging, and instead it's multiple specific fields. And some of that stuff is Red Hat satellite-ish terminology somewhere that just had to be there. Okay.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
I'm thinking more from ITIL and things like that.
Okay, so that's kind of, organizations aren't very different, but yeah, relatively similar. As I said, you can have users that are only parts of certain organizations and locations, and then they can there's a context switcher over here. So let's go back to the host page, and I'm going to go into a location that I know isn't. So like Westford, I don't think has any hosts. There you go. You don't have any hosts in Westford. Yeah.
So is that just acting like a filter?
Yeah, it's just scoping basically. And then when I go to provision a new host in Westford, and I don't have any compute resources, so you can see I can only do it on bare metal in Westford. Basically all the fields become scoped when you're inside of a location in an organization. All right. So the last kind of big thing that's in 1.1 that I'm going to talk about is trending. And this was written almost completely by a community member, so this is really cool because it's a pretty big feature. But basically, this is what I talked about before, where you can look at historical values of facts or look at historical values of compute resources and things like that. So you can say, hey, we had all these hosts on EC2, and suddenly we're now moving over to our OpenStack cluster. And as I said, things happening inside Foreman itself, so where stuff's getting provisioned, and kind of do change management via these trends. So you'll see this, but basically they're just graphs. This is actually the different compute resources that something got deployed on, so you can see suddenly someone deployed one host onto an overt cluster, and that's part of the trend now. And adding new trends is very easy, so you can say, I either want to do it based on fact value or based on compute resources, things like that. So you could set up your own trends. They don't all trend by default. So you could say, I need to trend how many machines are like SE Linux set in permissive mode versus enforcing versus disabled, and look at that over time. So basically, to add a new trend, you just add a trend counter. So that's what I was showing before, but we could easily add one here. So, host group trends, facts, environments, models, all that stuff. So, like, a fact name, you could, these are available via statistics as well, but you could do stuff like, if you wanted to watch jumping from Puppet 2.7 to 3.0, you could watch that as a trend across all your hosts. So, let's look.
You're in Westford, by the way.
Yeah, so that won't work, but I can change out of scope. Okay. So facts, client version, and let's just call it client version. Whoops. Alright, you get the point, but and it'll start trending once values start changing, so you can see, here, let's go look at this one host, or whatever it is. So there's no real change, but you can just see this one host has Puppet 3.02 installed on it.
So Foreman can deal with multiple Puppet masters and things like that?
You just install a smart proxy on every Puppet master.
Right, okay.
This collected at report submission time, right?
Yeah, so it's all done when an actual report comes in from the master. Alright. So kind of there are a few other nice things that got done as part of 1.1. Full support for Ruby 1.9, which is finally, because there have been, although it's not really available as system Ruby except in Fedora right now, and I think Debian testing. But yeah, full support for Ruby 1.9, Puppet 3 support. So Puppet 3 support got released, or Puppet 3 got released between when 1.0 got released and 1.1. So that's a nice thing. Some UI improvements. So we did some Bootstrap upgrades and kind of reorganization that made workflows more clear. And then the first version of the API is also included in 1.1. So there's a durable API layer now. Yeah.
The first version API.
Right.
We've had APIs.
So it's the first, I think, true API where there are a lot of consumers and people are, and it's kind of broad enough that you can access almost everything that you can do through the UI via the API.
And it won't get deprecated in one fell swoop when the API comes along.
It will not. So a big thing is it's all done, there's versioning via accept headers, so as we work on, there'll be a default, but you could say, I always want to pin to version 1.
Okay.
So
we'll
yeah.
keep that around for a while. Okay.
Yeah. And as we roll out new versions, we hope that you upgrade, but you don't have to. Yes. API versioning is good. Some people could learn that. So.
Largely, isn't the V1 API a version of the existing API?
Yeah. So it's not particularly different, but it's saying this is the real version 1. Now let's work on V2. Some big Foreman deployments. Yeah. So somehow CERN and SpaceX, which are like two of the coolest science companies, are both using Foreman, which is pretty great.
Semantics kind of a black mark.
It happens, man.
They're spreading viruses with Puppet.
Yeah. And we're a pretty big community. All the dev work happens on GitHub. We talk all day on Freenode. And there are lists on Google Groups. But yeah, these IRC channels are extremely active and very friendly. There are like basically no mean people in our IRC channels, so that's a nice change. Yeah, we're like relatively nice, which is
You're gonna give IRC a bad name.
Yeah. 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 So yeah. Join us, and we just launched a new website today, so very happy about that.
You should show that off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there debs for this, or is it just?
Yeah. So there's yum and deb.theforeman.org, and those are our package mirrors. There are RC packages for RC1 on there. I build the RPMs, and we have a guy in Scotland who does the debs. So I'm the only North American on my team, so that's fun. And get to kind of wake up very early and have lots of conversation, or very late depending on the day. But yeah, cool. So that's
What's the relationship between Foreman and Red Hat?
Yes, so it will ultimately be a part of the CloudForms product line, which includes stuff like Cotello, Image Factory, if you're familiar with any of those projects. We're in the project. We're really the project. So, like, we're really building in the community. There's no, like, product version of Foreman just yet. So it's all upstream work right now. And very friendly community. We accept tons of community patches and encourage contribution there.
It didn't start at Red Hat, though.
No, so Ohad, who's the project lead, was working at another company, and he kind of came to Red Hat to get the opportunity to nurture it, and so yeah. But there are 6 people, 6 Red Hat employees who work on Foreman now. Yeah.
Ask a stupid question, but I got screwed early on by using the Foreman installer to install Foreman. It installed such an ancient version that
An ancient version of what? Of Foreman?
Foreman.
Yeah, so it installs the stable version.
Okay.
Which is now 1, right?
Which is 1.0 right now, yeah.
Right, but back in the day it was like
0.4.
several points
Okay,
behind whatever was being hawked. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
so
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but it's very recent. There's a dev branch that will install the latest stuff, and you can also do a Git-based install and get head of the develop branch. But yeah, the installer has support for RC. We're also working on basically an answers file system. So you say, these are all the things about my Foreman installation that I want, and put it into a YAML file. So we could write a CLI tool that would let you just call Foreman installer, and then it will run all the Puppet stuff with the right settings.
So at install time for Foreman, do you get to choose whether Foreman will install a DHCP server for you, or an NTP server, or a DNS server for you, and can I get the whole thing in one cookie?
Yeah. So does it make sense for me to show the installer? Would people be interested in that? Okay, cool. So the installer is basically so the installer is just a bunch of submodules, essentially. The develop branch is a little different because it has the answer file work in it. But the stable branch is will set up stuff like a TFTP server, a DHCP server, a DNS server, all that stuff.
But with certain things disableable. Because I wouldn't want to run a DHCP server on Rackspace. Am I missing something?
Yeah, so you wouldn't need a DHCP server on a lot of cloud providers, but this would be you don't need to always install it, right? So we're not always going to give you a TFTP server. It's selective, so you just pipe basically into Puppet apply whichever classes you need right now. The installer will be a lot better about that ultimately, but yeah, it just sets up bind. That's it. So stuff like that. But to get the most basic installation, all you do to get Foreman, the proxy, and a Puppet master, you basically just say, give me these things, or if you want, these are the reports, but you just say, what's that?
Bigger?
Yeah. Sorry. You just say, these are the classes that I need. Give me a proxy, give me Foreman, give me a master that's based on Apache. As I said, almost all the classes are parameterized now, so they're really easy to edit. It's not really yet a just run this thing, except you can just run this thing and get Foreman and a proxy, but you don't get a database right now, for example. So all that stuff will be worked on. Yeah. So that's the installer. Any addition? Oh, I'm going to show the audit system for you. So.
Also, do you have a guesstimate of when 1.1 will be released?
So, yes, I can give you the furthest out time length. So it's in RC4 right now. Right. Lots of people run it in production. Lots of people, Brian runs Git head basically in production, and it works. So we have a really, it usually works, yeah.
How many systems are you managing?
Except when it doesn't.
100.
Oof, okay. There's some risk involved then.
Oh. Yeah. Are you writing tests?
Yes, so we have a lot of tests for the proxy and for Foreman itself.
What's the coverage?
It's not great. So it's last time I checked, it's 0.6 to 1. So it's not terrible, but it's not awesome.
More than half.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thought you were trying percents.
No.
Between half and 1%.
Yeah, ratios.
You can just round up at that point.
Right. So I mean, we have a full CI system. So every time there's a commit to develop, we're working on it for RPMs, but for Debs, right now every time we commit to develop in the test pass, we build new packages and promote them to the development repo.
And push them immediately to Brian's server.
Yeah, we have a postscript that SSHs onto Brian's server and it pulls.
And then you have StatsD monitoring his pulse.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Is Brian up or Brian down?
Yeah.
Brian is dead.
Brian's having a heart attack.
Brian's down. Yeah. So yeah, we need to write more tests, but we have pretty good test coverage, and generally stuff doesn't get committed that, especially bug fixes, won't get committed unless they have tests. So we are pretty good about tests, and if we look at Jenkins, we do a lot of test work. So you can see these are kind of all the different tests that we run. I'm working right now on getting, every time you commit, it'll run all the tests against all the different database backends. Right now it's only SQLite. So once we have that, we potentially miss a lot of Postgres stuff because Postgres is a lot more strict about certain things. But yeah.
Are these tests public? Is this accessible?
Yeah. You can go to ci.theforeman.org and view all this stuff and see how our tests run.
In terms of best practices, you just said most things run against SQLite. What's the scale of SQLite? When do you need to go and move to...
Okay.
If you were going to do an install and test this thing out, SQLite's fine, I'm sure.
I think... So, SQLite is... once one client is talking to it, no more clients can talk to it. That's problematic. If you're trying to write facts from two different hosts at once. Stuff like that.
Things like that.
So,
But, yeah. Basically, I would say if you're setting up a test instance, SQLite is easy. Installing Postgres or MySQL will not be particularly hard.
go there.
Just do it first, and then you won't ever have to deal with it. But we do have some rake tasks that will actually just migrate you from SQLite to Postgres or SQLite to MySQL.
I remember early on we might have initially used SQLite, or might have, I forget. But I think we could get up to like 30 hosts,
Yeah.
I mean, you can really evaluate it with SQLite and
Yeah.
even with WebBrick.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not like throwing hundreds of servers at it in your test case, you don't need to go to Passenger right off.
Yep.
I've got 700 hosts reporting to Postgres with like almost zero load.
Yeah.
And we're using WebRig too.
Yeah.
Have you guys thought of using Puma?
Puma's interesting. I don't see an immediate need for it, and I think like people are used to Passenger. I think we would probably move to Thin first, and then go to something more efficient. But like the numbers behind, for those of you who don't know, Puma is a web server that's like ridiculously efficient. Like the numbers on the website will blow your mind and make everyone else sad.
We were using Thin, but now we're on Puma.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, they're just rack servers, right? So they're relatively drop-in. But I think, yeah, Passenger works for now, and it works pretty well, and a lot of people know how Apache works, so I think it's kind of a lowest common denominator thing, and it's pretty efficient. So, yeah.
Do you guys automatically install Passenger for the Puppet Master?
So I don't know if it's automatic. I forget what the parameters are, but you can definitely say use Passenger. Is use Passenger set to true? Do you know that?
By default?
Yeah.
I
I want to say it's not.
Okay.
But
it's easy enough
it's
to
like
switch.
editing 4 characters.
Oh, wait, you're talking about an installer?
Yeah.
I think it is.
It might be.
Okay.
It's just so easy now that it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's if it's not the default, it's easy enough to make the default in your case. And the modules there are a few interdependencies on things where like we need to restart a service based on the state of something else, but basically you can completely decouple them. And so if you only need specific ones, you don't need to you can put them into your repo and as a submodule and manage them that way. Yep.
So which of the 1.1 features was the hardest thing?
So, parameterized classes was pretty complex. I would say it had this, like, locations and orgs touches everything. And there's a lot more kind of, like, how do people use Foreman involved in that. So there's a lot more, like, social engineering. But parameterized classes is pretty in-depth, especially because we added a type system for parameters. But yeah, I would say, like, those were the 2 largest features by far that are in 1.1.
From like a user experience standpoint, it was difficult.
Yeah, especially parameterized classes is just a really complex UI, and locations and orgs touches every single part of Foreman.
Your code base.
Yeah.
Audit.
Can you talk about because I haven't implemented Hira yet because I'm stupid, and so it seems like there's some overlap there between
Definitely.
like what Hira might spit out given certain situations, like filling in certain variables a certain way, and like the way you're handling parameterized classes based on certain conditions, like facts and things like that.
Yeah.
So like, what is I know like one, it doesn't seem like you're replacing it really, but like, what is the comparison or like different use cases?
So I would say if you're using Foreman, you don't need Hira. You already have a hierarchical. It's the hardest word to ever say. Parameter system, right? You already have, hey, this is a global parameter, and I want to override it in a host group, and then I want to override it on a host. So you have that. So you lose a big benefit. There are some things in Hira that we haven't really replaced yet. One of them is like Hira GPG, which would be a nice thing to replace because it's a really nice way to get credentials and stuff onto servers.
Have you? And I guess this is silly, but have you thought about just using Hira in your project to handle that stuff? I guess that'd be a huge change. So it'd be.
It's not that big of a change, but I think this system, like parameters, are very deeply integrated into Foreman, and like as I said, there's Foreman community work to do Hira integration. Right. So it's definitely something that if you Google, you'll find.
Right.
And the idea is you could expose what's in Foreman, their hierarchical structure as a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know why they named the thing that it is and the thing the same thing.
But they didn't already.
Make it hard to say.
Yeah, whatever. He's they at this point.
Well, he joined them now.
Yeah.
Yeah, the auditing.
Yes. Cool. So we've kind of diverged, but so you can see, like you can see, I provisioned a new host. I rebuilt a host at a certain time. All this stuff. So this is like, you can see which user did it. You can see what changed, and like, someone edited the default kickstart config. Let's go look at what happened. Here's a diff. Stuff like that.
Can you require comments and that sort of thing?
So there is like this. Let me see. So you can get the history, but you can't actually. Let's see. I don't believe there's any field where you could say like this is what changed inside of this diff. No.
Can you actually roll? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this piece of it is just a very rich, kind of graphical log of all the activities that have happened,
Can you actually roll back, or you just have to use the diff and like figure?
So there's no way to actually say like, hey, I want to go back to the way it was 5 days ago.
Right. But you could do it. I mean, yourself. Yeah.
Well, you could always use
You have all the diffs, right? So.
Yeah.
And you can also look at the complete state of like that's what the kickstart config looked like, copy paste.
Sure.
But an actual rollback system would be nice. And another thing around config templates specifically that is potentially useful is actually being able to put all of them into a Git repo and us having some way to parse it.
Right.
Yes. I'm going to say putting this into Git would be...
Because then you have a system that is only made to diff files, right? Like that is Git's whole job. And...
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks almost like a Git log, sort of.
A little bit, yeah.
And that would give you the place to put the why you changed it, what changed.
Sure. Yep.
And roll back.
Yeah. Definitely. Anything else that people want to see? Questions? Yeah.
Someone mentioned a CMDB before.
Mm.
Do you have any thoughts on integrating this with a CMDB?
Adios.
Yeah.
Use this as
is that your single source of truth?
No, I was actually going to use. I'm considering using this as our primary CMDB,
okay.
And then using, and then streaming off of this to Nagios and to Puppet and to, well, not Kotlin, but to provisioning.
Yeah.
And eventually into IPA.
Yeah. So I think if you have an existing one, it's a little bit more difficult. So if you have a source of truth already, we don't really have a way to say like. This is the difference between, your Zabbix install or your Nagios install, which is your source of truth, and Foreman, but could be interesting. I think a lot of people use Foreman as their CMDB, so I think, and then you can query that from external tools because we have an API.
What's IP? What do you mean by IPA?
Oh, I'm sorry. IPA is another Red Hat product. Free IPA is the actual upstream, and then it's the Red Hat Identity Management, something like that.
I was hoping it was beer.
No, it's...
Identity management product?
Having said that, trying to go ahead and Google for it is really nasty and annoying. But
if you search for free IPA, you'll find it.
Yeah, it's...
just don't put a space.
Yeah. It's Kerberos, LDAP, bind integration, and dog
That came out of the Netscape
dog
code base,
tags. No, it's integrates 389 Dog Patch, I think.
389 came from Netscape.
Yeah.
So you've got 389 Kerberos, and IPA handles the ugly problem of how do I dispatch an initial curb ticket for the host. It handles the nastiness of curb installation and has PKI integrated.
Right.
I'm actually getting goosebumps now because
No, it's really
my
cool.
name is in the LDAP code base from over 10 years ago when I was hacking the Netscape LDAP server.
That's just about the time that they forked it for Red Hat.
I think it integrates in. It gives you a nice GUI for Kerberos. It's not Heimdall. It's MIT's.
I haven't really used it.
I'm not sure. I can't remember which one it is, but
It's MIT.
it's MIT's. But it basically makes a nice identity management system with Kerberos, and it also integrates in with SSSD in terms of getting rid of NSCD and NCSD.
But that is not mandatory.
Not mandatory, but makes it a hell of a lot easier. And all the other things.
For provisioning, do you have to use DHCP, or can you feed it static IPs?
You can give it an IP.
For provisioning, can you do a schedule provisioning?
Say that you can input, sorry.
Oh, right.
That you can input Amazon accounts.
Yeah.
You want to show that?
Yeah. So let's actually look at compute resources more generally, because I think that would be helpful. So we have these two kinds of concepts, right? We have like a host that is part of Foreman, and we have a host that exists on a compute resource that Foreman might not manage. So here, for example, like let's look at these are VMs. Foreman doesn't know anything about them really, other than they exist on my Amazon account and they're shut off. And then you have all your AMIs. So this is like a CentOS AMI.
So you'll register an
Yeah.
AMI that you want to use in provisioning beforehand.
So for the image-based providers, you actually say like this is the image ID or the AMI that I want to use. So like which ones are image-based? So AWS, Rackspace, and Joyent, and OpenStack as well. Yeah, are all image-based. So there you actually just start with a base image and then build on top of it. But you add. So let's like if we go back over here. You add a new compute resource, right? So I would just add my EC2 account, access key, secret key. So you could manage all this with IAM if you wanted something that was like only provisioning machines and you didn't want to have to deal with security issues or anything like that. And then you just load regions and you say, so these compute resources are tied directly to regions. There's no multi-region compute resource right now. So you say like this is my US East compute resource, and then you add images there because so AMIs are inside of regions. So
I mean, there's one API endpoint per region,
right?
So it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, and doing stuff like it's all scoped inside a region, right? You can't get all of your like EIPs, for example. You just can't.
But you can have two compute resources, one for each region.
Right.
And
So you would say like I have.
And they'll all show up on your list of hosts.
Yep.
You know?
I have my US West, my US East, and my EU West compute resources.
How does the role-based access control fit into like compute resource creation? Can you like limit how many compute resources in the region?
So it's not that deep yet. It's something that needs to get kind of overhauled. But stuff like that, like there are a few ways to go with it. I think the first one is say like this person can only have 10 VMs on this compute resource. But the other way you could go is say this host group can only have this many machines inside of it, or even further than that is like this host group requires a box to have at least 4 gigs of RAM because we're going to run Tomcat on it, and that requires a lot of RAM. Yeah.
I don't know if we have time, but I think it might be useful to show the group a finished script and how to edit it.
Yeah.
You know.
So that was like kind of tangent-y, but okay.
Just before you switch off,
yeah.
VMware, is it cloud or is it just standard VMware?
It's like it calls your Brian has a VMware cluster that manages it just calls your vCenter. But I set up a single node ESXi installation and it worked there too. It's all through Fog, so
no problem. I just wasn't sure if it needed the cloud. That's all.
The head of this project is now the maintainer for the VMware Fog integration.
Poor OHAD.
I
I wouldn't hold my breath for anything requiring vCloud.
I don't care. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't need vCloud. That was all.
It's free right now. Or it was until
not
like
free.
Yeah.
You have to have Enterprise Plus, and you have to pay support afterwards.
Yeah, I know. I didn't buy it.
It's funny. The chef guys are maintaining the fog for OpenStack.
Yeah.
Co-opetition.
But it
Better for
I mean,
everybody.
we use that, right? And lots of people use VMware, and it's honestly much easier to use someone else's library than write your own, obviously. And so
It's even easier to fix other people's bugs than to write your own.
Indeed. So it's like, Ohad, who's the Foreman project lead, is a committer on Fog, so getting stuff upstream is pretty nice, because it's like, hey, Ohad, here's a patch. Cool. Next release it'll be out. And so sometimes we toggle between using a Git version. So for VMware, for example, we needed Fog 1.8, and it wasn't out yet, and so we switched to the Git version for a little while, just for the develop branch.
Just everyone in Bundler, instead of saying a gem version, you can say a Git, or what is it, a Git hash?
You just give it a Git repo and it'll check out head, or you can say, I want this SHA, and it will check that one out, or this branch, whatever. Yep. So that's that.
I might have missed it. Sorry. Do you guys have much BIOS management for known hardware vendors?
So, not really, but we do have models that are mapped to hosts. So you could say, like, this is a Dell, R610 box, and then act on that. You can do that as part of you could do that as part of, like, the Kickstart stuff, but we don't really have robust BIOS management right now. I think, it's semi-cloud focused, so less so now, but you don't need to deal with that. So.
Yeah. We should take a look at what we're doing. We're even ordering and reordering NICs and getting into doing cool.
It's definitely interesting.
Switching JBOD to RAID and back and forth depending on the kind of apps you're going to be deploying. But sorry.
Which project?
No,
Which project is that?
Crowbar.
Yep.
Did you have that in the roadmap a little bit? Even though
Yes.
What are these Finnish scripts?
Yeah, so
talking about Finnish.
I'll show you that.
They're from Finland.
Also, while we're talking about Crowbar, if anyone's going to DevOps Days tomorrow, Judd and I are both on this panel about provisioning, so that could be interesting. And I think it will be, it almost certainly will be recorded, so be sure to check it out afterwards. It's like a nice duel.
Yeah.
It's a friendly duel.
And we have Sean Amara and who else?
And I don't know if it's Eric and Eric Shamau from Puppet Labs who will be talking about Razor. So
we'll all just gang up on Razor.
Cool. Insider trading. But yeah, I think that'll be good. So let's go back over here. Provisioning templates. So finished templates are arbitrary things that get run on hosts after they've been provisioned. So like.
Can I just mention that they're the only thing that gets run on an image-based provision.
Right. So if you're using an AMI and you need to bootstrap Puppet on it and it doesn't have Puppet yet, or if you, like, some people just build Puppet into their AMI and then all they need to do is the certificate management stuff. But yeah, these are basically, you have like Pixie templates, gPixie, iPixie templates, provisioning templates, and then kind of finished script. So let's like look at a CentOS one. So this does stuff like runs NTP date so that the time is correct on the host. Do that, please. Especially if you use OpenSSL and Ruby, you need to do that. If you've ever run across that, it's not a fun day when that happens.
So how does this actually work? Does it add it to the end of the Kickstart?
It actually gets run over SSH for most of the providers. Are there any that don't do it over SSH?
Apparently it's SSH.
Yeah. So you actually tell
because
it...
It's universal.
Right.
There was talk about using cloud in it, or this or that, and
Yeah.
it was like, well, the bare metal stuff, we can use SSH, we have the method there, let's just use that. And then later, if somebody wants to refactor it for other methods, we can.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's all just executed over... This is evaluated and then executed over SSH. So it sets up stuff like... You see this snippet call? This actually includes a snippet, right? So this sets up your Etsy hosts file correctly, installs all the different debug keys. So you can access parameters in Foreman through the host object.params and then which param you want in
Can you
that.
show somebody a snippet real quick? Just I don't know if everybody caught what that is. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so they're basically just tiny chunks that you might want to include in a bunch of different finish templates, and it's a way to dry up your finish templates. So let's find a snippet.
Can I use snippets from Puppet also?
What's that?
Are those provided to me as the part of the factory items?
No, I don't believe so. So
Just in a big picture, this is the finish script is a shell script that's been templatized.
yeah, it's really not like a particularly deeply integrated piece of logic. It's just to get the box into the state so that Foreman can talk to it.
And they ship with a number of finished templates finished scripts that will get Puppet installed on common OSs.
Yep, and like Brian has a Git repo that has all the Ubuntu precise finish scripts that you need to get Puppet bootstrapped and stuff like that. So that's another place, like the community side, where you could say like, I want to use snippets and like finish scripts or gpixie templates from community members. That's like a cool thing to be able to do, because then we could maintain a central repo of like, this is the canonical CentOS 6 finish script, this is the canonical Rel 6 finish script, all that stuff. So, but yeah, this is basically just a tiny piece of logic. This is a finish script, this is a snippet that is for Etsy hosts, and you can include it wherever you want. This doesn't really have any OS specific logic, right? Etsy hosts is on every Linux-based system, and it's going to be there. So you might want to use it, or you probably want to use it in every single box that you deploy, no matter what OS you're running.
Ubuntu finish script and the CentOS finish script, but Etsy host is going to be the same.
Yep.
So you might just incorporate it. It just allows you to abstract away.
Yep, exactly.
And talk about like the what do they call the parameters that you can include? Like in a finish script, you have like $.
Yeah.
Like
So inside of finish script, you get certain parameters that are allowed to be rendered via safe mode, and safe mode is this gem, and it basically lets you say like, these are objects that you're allowed to use inside of the script. So it's a kind of security layer between what gets rendered as inside of a finish script and what is Foreman's thing. Yeah.
So it has access to variable scope that you set upon provisioning initially, like at host is like the host name you set upon provisioning, or what is it?
Yeah, it's the host object that you're currently provisioning. Yeah.
And you can tell it about, like, you can know about Puppet Masters, you can know about its own host name, you can know, and
you can grab parameters. There's a guide to actually getting them all, but
yeah.
So you can see here, there's a wiki page on this. But yeah, so that's kind of finish scripts, and all like finish scripts, Pixie templates, Kickstart, Pre-Seed, all those kind of fall under the config template nomenclature, and they're all edited similarly. It's just a matter of function. So then what you actually do is assign these to. So this is a snippet, so you can't actually do it, but let's see.
Now you could technically just put a shell script in there, but it is EE Ruby, which is just templated Ruby templates.
Yeah, just a Ruby template. If you use these in Puppet, it's the exact same thing. Yeah. And then you can say this finish script gets run on Rel 6 and CentOS 6. Easy enough. And you can also say, you can add a combination of, like, you could say, on my OpenStack host group and in the production environment, this is my finish script. In my overt host group in staging, this is my finish script, stuff like that.
I think this is really cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's super useful.
Now, how does one go ahead and do all this work? Has anyone done vagrant work with this stuff? To go ahead and build tests? Because I've right now got a Puppet master image and a Puppet slave that I can then just bring up on my laptop.
Yep.
Vagrant. Adding this is going to mean I'm going to have to add this to the master. Everything else.
So, I haven't thought about this all that much, but I think you could extract a bunch of this logic into VWE and just build boxes that way. And so you could have, like, I mean, it wouldn't probably make it into VB Core because it's very specific to Foreman, but it could be interesting to like have it call to actually grab a rendered script and then use that to do like VB. So like VB uses Kickstart and Pixie and all that stuff. So.
VB's the shit.
And the author of VB was supposed to be here. I don't know if he is.
What is
Nichols?
Yeah, what is it?
Patrick Dubois.
Oh, he can't sleep.
Oh yeah, but he's the man, and he'll be at DevOps Days tomorrow.
How does one spell VB?
VEEWEE.
Would never have guessed that.
For those of you who don't know, VWE is like an image builder type tool for Vagrant boxes.
But also it builds VMware boxes, builds KVM.
Oh yeah, now
boxes,
it has
builds-
support for a
builds-
bunch
yeah,
of other
it's
stuff.
Awesome.
Okay.
I use it a lot.
Yeah. And Mitchell's working on getting off of VirtualBox and is gonna add libvirt support and is already working on VMware Fusion. So those weird seg faults, if you use a Mac or Linux, will be gone with Vagrant, which is nice because seg faults are not fun,
Especially in my kernel.
Do you guys, if I want to participate in development of this, do you have a Vagrant box where I could just
So
make
yeah,
development?
I maintain
Okay,
one, but I kind of maintain it. So it's not like a real like. It's very simple. It just uses the installer to actually set it up, and uses some parameters to use Git. But yeah, there is one on my GitHub page, which is.
That's actually more what I meant in this case, is how right now I'm actually
Oh, okay.
testing building full machines, and I have to bring up a Puppet Master to do it.
Oh,
and
okay.
then testing the recipes.
So
testing
if you're using Puppet,
manifest.
you can just use our installer modules to actually just do that. Yeah.
I'll just do that with Vagrant. That's fine.
That's my contact information. For questions, hate mail, whatever. Yeah, and that's where I am on GitHub.
Pull
And
requests.
yeah, pull requests, please.
How about roadmap?
Oh, roadmap, cool. So we're actually gonna hold a roadmap meeting right after 1.1 gets released. Subscribe to like the user and dev list if you want to see that kind of what's happening there. But
About the whips,
what?
the works in progress.
Okay, so sometimes feels like that.
Go ahead.
New acronym of the day.
Yeah, no, there's some bad acronyms. You saw one of those. Yeah, so, yeah, it's very specific, but the kind of main, like one of the biggest works in progress right now is really kind of like spiffing up locations and organizations beyond what it is. So it was such a big initial project that it's really kind of, now we're looking at ways to kind of normalize locations, normalize organizations, and building tools around that. All that stuff is going to get committed probably like tomorrow or Monday. So that'll maybe get into 1.1, we'll see. And then as far as like the further out roadmap, I talked about the microkernel a little bit. That's a big project that is basically working. It just needs to be cleaned up and kind of released into the wild and have people use it and have people break it. But that's definitely a big thing. And as I said, we're holding a roadmap meeting right after 1.1 gets released. And that's kind of when we're going to decide what's next. So that'll be probably on IRC and maybe like a Google Plus Hangout or something. And basically like what people want. There's like a 50 message long thread on the users list where we're talking about stuff that we would want to do in the next versions. So if you have anything to add there, we're on Google Groups, so it's really simple to get involved. And as I said, basically no one is mean in the Foreman community, so that's really nice. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it possible with Foreman and Puppet to make deployments which are spread on several hosts, and well, like you have a condition to be met on one host in order to do another step on another host, like you want to deploy on one host, and when it's finished, then you want to deploy, let's say, Tomcat application on another host.
So this probably actually isn't that great of a... Foreman wouldn't be that good at doing that right now, and actually Puppet isn't that good at doing that right now. Though, like, when you have a lot of hosts that are interdependent, it's like when you're achieving a final state on every host, right? Like the goal of Puppet and Chef and CF